There comes a moment in your life when everything starts to feel unfamiliar, your desires no longer make sense, your relationships begin to shift, and your emotions seem to deepen beyond what you can explain. You find yourself sitting in silence, staring at a wall or the sky, not because you're lazy or lost, but because something inside of you is starting to wake up. And with that awakening comes something no one warned you about: the darkness. Not just the poetic kind, but real, raw darkness. A heaviness in your chest, a sense of disconnection, a wave of sadness or anxiety that appears out of nowhere. And here's the truth that most people miss: these dark feelings are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that something real is happening. They are symptoms of a soul that is finally breaking out of its cage. You see, we've been taught to fear darkness, to suppress it, to medicate it, to avoid it at all costs. But in the path of true spiritual awakening, darkness is not the enemy, it's the messenger. It's your soul's way of communicating in a language deeper than words. And when you begin to awaken spiritually, your entire internal system starts to rewire. Old beliefs begin to dissolve. Suppressed emotions rise to the surface. Energetic patterns that kept you small begin to break apart. And the body, the mind, and the heart can feel overwhelmed. That overwhelm often shows up as what I call the 7 dark feelings, and each one of them, when understood correctly, is a sacred signal. Not a blockage, not a failure, a signal that you're on the path. Let's start with the feeling of deep sadness that has no clear cause. You might wake up in the morning with tears in your eyes, or feel a heavy weight throughout your day that no amount of distraction can shake. This sadness is not weakness, it's release. It's your body letting go of lifetimes of suppressed emotion, inherited trauma, and false identities. The sadness you feel is not just personal, it's ancestral, collective, cosmic. And instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" try asking, "What is this sadness trying to show me?" Because sometimes the deepest healing begins the moment we stop trying to escape what we feel and finally allow ourselves to feel it all. Then there's the feeling of anxiety or panic, even when nothing appears to be wrong. This kind of anxiety is not always about danger, it's about expansion. Your nervous system is adjusting to higher frequencies. Your energy field is opening to new possibilities. And that can feel like chaos to a mind that's addicted to control. When you're awakening, your inner world starts to accelerate, and your ego freaks out. It wants to keep you safe by keeping you small. So anxiety becomes its defense mechanism. But what if that anxiety is actually a sign that you're on the edge of a breakthrough? What if it's the contraction before the birth? The question isn't how do I fix my anxiety? It's what truth is trying to be born through this tension. The third feeling is numbness or emptiness. You stop caring about the things that used to excite you. The world feels gray. People talk, but it doesn't reach you. This numbness is not apathy, it's protection. Your soul is pulling you inward. You're in a sacred cocoon. You're being emptied, not because you're broken, but because you're being prepared to be filled with something true. When you feel empty, don't rush to fill the void. Sit with it. Let the void speak. Because the void is not empty. It's full of potential. And sometimes the greatest clarity comes not from adding more, but from letting go completely. Then comes the feeling of disconnection. From people, from your goals, sometimes even from yourself. You feel like a stranger in your own life. This is the soul detaching from the illusion. It's the unraveling of false attachments. The friendships that were based on old versions of you begin to fade. The goals you once set from ego no longer motivate you. This disconnection is painful, but it's also sacred. Because you're not actually disconnecting, you're reconnecting to something deeper, something real. You're creating space for alignment. The pain of disconnection is the price of authenticity. And the reward is a life that finally feels like you. The fifth feeling is anger. Sudden, intense, sometimes irrational. You feel like screaming at the world, or maybe just at yourself. But anger is not a flaw, it's a fire. It's the energy of awakening rising in your body. It's your truth saying, "I will no longer be silenced." Anger, when honored consciously, is a portal to power. It reveals where your boundaries were crossed, where your voice was taken, where your energy was stolen. Instead of suppressing your anger, ask it, what are you protecting? Because underneath anger is always grief, and underneath grief is always love. And when you follow the trail, you realize that your rage is not a sign of regression, it's the roar of a soul remembering its worth. Next is fear. Not fear of physical danger, but existential fear. Fear of change. Fear of the unknown. Fear that your life is falling apart. But spiritual awakening is the death of everything false. And death always brings fear. Your ego is afraid because it knows it's no longer in control. But your soul is not afraid. Your soul thrives in the unknown. So when fear arises, don't push it away. Sit with it. Breathe through it. Ask it, what are you afraid I'll lose? Because often, fear is just your old self trying to survive the birth of your new self. And finally, there's confusion. You don't know who you are anymore. You question everything. You feel lost. But in awakening, getting lost is necessary. The old map no longer works. The old labels no longer fit. Confusion is not failure, it's freedom. It means your mind is no longer clinging to certainty. It means your soul is ready to lead. And the question is not, how do I find clarity? But can I trust myself even in the fog? So if you're feeling any of these dark emotions, I want you to know this. You're not broken. You're awakening. These feelings don't mean the path isn't working. They mean it's working perfectly. You're shedding skins. You're burning illusions. You're stepping into who you really are. And it's not always pretty, but it's always real. Now ask yourself this, if these dark feelings are sacred messengers, then what have I been running from that's actually trying to set me free?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
There's a moment in every spiritual journey where the ground beneath your feet begins to crack. Not just metaphorically, but energetically, your identity begins to feel fragile. Your ambitions lose their grip, and everything you once clung to for stability starts to dissolve. And in that moment, it feels like your life is falling apart. But here's the paradox. What feels like the end is actually the beginning. The sacred breakdown is not a sign of failure, it's a sign that the false self is collapsing under the weight of the truth. And that collapse, that terrifying, disorienting unraveling, it's the doorway. It's the passage through which real power enters your life, not power over others, but power within. The kind of power that doesn't need validation, doesn't chase anything, and doesn't fear the unknown because it is the unknown made conscious. We are conditioned to fear breakdowns. Society tells us to avoid them, to medicate them, to rush our way back to normal. But what if the breakdown is sacred? What if it's intelligence, divine intelligence, rearranging your life into a truer form? You see, the ego builds a structure to protect us. It creates personalities, roles, labels, beliefs, all in the name of safety and control. And for a while, that structure works. It helps us survive. But survival and awakening are not the same. And when your soul is ready to evolve, it begins to dismantle everything that was built from fear. That dismantling is what we experience as a breakdown. But it's not a destruction, it's a disintegration of the false. And when the false disintegrates, what remains is raw, vulnerable, and terrifyingly honest, but also limitless. During a sacred breakdown, you may feel like you're losing control, but that's because you are. And that's the point. Control is the ego's illusion. Awakening requires surrender. And surrender only becomes possible when your strategies for control stop working. So when you feel like you can't hold it together anymore, know this. You're not meant to. You're meant to allow what's falling apart to keep falling, because only then can you see what was never really you. Only then can you begin to build from soul, not survival. And that rebuilding doesn't start with action. It starts with presence, with being willing to sit in the rubble without trying to clean it up too fast, with asking yourself, what was I building my life on that wasn't real? Think about this. Have you ever tried to force something to work? A relationship, a job, a dream only to feel more drained the harder you tried. That's the soul's way of whispering, "This isn't it." And when we don't listen to the whisper, the universe turns up the volume. That's the breakdown. It's not punishment, it's redirection. It's grace disguised as chaos. And if you can stop resisting it, if you can sit in the fire long enough to hear its message, you will find something you never knew you were missing. Yourself. Not the self you've been performing, but the self you've been avoiding. The one who doesn't need to be fixed because they were never broken. The one who doesn't need to prove anything because they already are everything. There's a strange kind of beauty in the breakdown. It strips away the noise. It silences the inner critic. It softens you. It humbles you. It makes you ask questions you were too busy to ask before. What really matters to me? What am I doing this all for? Who am I without my titles, my performance, my plans? These questions don't have fast answers, but they have real ones. And those answers can only emerge in the silence that follows surrender. That silence may feel empty at first, but it's not. It's alive. It's where you reconnect to the divine. Not as an idea, but as a living pulse inside you. So if you're in the middle of a breakdown right now, if you feel like you're losing everything, pause, breathe, listen. Don't fight the fall. Trust it. Because what you're losing isn't your life, it's your illusion. And what you're gaining is clarity, alignment, and the raw material of real transformation. The kind that doesn't come from reading books or repeating mantras, but from dying to who you thought you were so you can remember who you've always been. Let me ask you this: if the worst thing that's happening to you right now is actually the best thing for your soul's evolution, could you find the courage to bless it instead of curse it? There comes a point on the path, often after the sacred breakdown, when something even more unsettling begins to occur. It's not just your emotions unraveling, it's your identity. The person you thought you were begins to dissolve. The dreams you once chased feel hollow. The way you used to introduce yourself, define yourself, even talk to yourself, begins to feel like a lie you can no longer tell. This is the inner earthquake. It doesn't make a sound, but it shakes everything. It's not happening around you, it's happening through you. And it's terrifying. Because we're not just losing things, we are losing ourselves. Or at least, what we believed ourselves to be. And in that shattering, something holy breaks through. Something unseen. Something eternal. Something that doesn't need a name to exist. The inner earthquake feels like identity death. And in many ways it is. But death, in the spiritual sense, is never an ending, it's a revealing. The ego, for all its effort and noise, is just a mask. A necessary mask, yes, but still a mask. It's made up of stories we inherited, stories we created to feel safe. And awakening doesn't destroy the ego out of cruelty, it deconstructs it out of truth. Because truth can't wear a mask. And when the truth begins to rise, the mask begins to crack. That's what the earthquake is. It's truth rising from the deepest layers of your being, shaking off everything that isn't you. During this phase, you'll feel lost not just in your life, but in yourself. You might look in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back. You might hear your own voice and wonder who's speaking. You might revisit your goals and realize they were never truly yours. This loss of identity is not failure, it's freedom being born. It's your soul finally having the space to speak louder than your conditioning. And when that voice begins to speak, it doesn't sound like ambition. It doesn't sound like pressure. It sounds like peace, a quiet knowing, a deep, still presence that says, you are not who you thought, you are something far vaster. But let's be honest, this process is not graceful. It's messy. It's confusing. It's emotional. And that's okay, because you're not here to perform transformation, you're here to live it. That means embracing the in-between. The space where one identity has died and the new one hasn't fully formed. That space is sacred. It's where the soul does its deepest work, but it's also where the mind panics. The ego wants structure. It wants to know what's next. It wants to rebuild immediately. But the soul whispers, wait. It asks for stillness, for trust, for emptiness. Because only in that emptiness can the real self emerge, not the self you built to survive, but the self you came here to be. So what do you do when the inner earthquake hits? You stop resisting. You stop trying to fix what's breaking. And instead you get curious. Ask yourself, what part of me is being asked to die? What mask am I still clinging to out of habit or fear? And more importantly, who am I becoming underneath all this noise? These questions don't need perfect answers. They need presence. Because presence is what allows the new self to be born not through force, but through allowing. You might find yourself crying for no reason, laughing without context, feeling everything and nothing in the same breath. That's the soul recalibrating. That's the nervous system releasing lifetimes of tension. That's the divine moving through your body, breaking apart every false layer so that you can finally come home to the truth. You were never just this identity. You were never just your trauma, your job, your name, your story. You are awareness itself, having a human experience. And when you remember that, not just intellectually, but viscerally, everything changes. Not because the world outside shifts, but because your center returns. This phase is not something you fix. It's something you feel. It's something you face. And if you can find the courage to stand still while your old self crumbles, you'll witness something extraordinary. The emergence of your essence. The part of you that shines without trying. The part of you that knows without thinking. The part of you that doesn't need to chase because it's already home. That's what breaks through the rubble. That's what rises from the quake. And so I ask you, in this raw space between who you were and who you're becoming, are you willing to let go of the identity that once protected you so you can step into the truth that will liberate you? There is a moment after the breakdown, after the silence, after the identity has shattered and the dust begins to settle, when something ancient within you starts to breathe again. It's subtle at first, a flicker, a whisper, a sensation not in your mind but in your chest, in your bones. It does not come with fireworks or fanfare. It comes with stillness, with a presence so profound that for the first time in your life you feel what it means to be home. This is the soul rebirth. It doesn't happen in the light. It happens through the darkness. And it's not something you achieve, it's something you remember. Because the light you've been seeking, it was never out there. It was hidden in the parts of yourself you were most afraid to feel. You begin to realize that the sadness, the fear, the emptiness, the chaos, all of it was a purification, a divine fire burning away the illusion that you are separate, small, or unworthy. And in its place, what rises is not a better version of your old self. What rises is you without the mask, without the performance, without the need to prove or please or protect. It's a version of you that doesn't need to strive for peace because it is peace. It doesn't beg for love because it is love. It doesn't chase the light because it embodies light. This rebirth doesn't feel like being fixed. It feels like being found, and not by others, by yourself. You begin to trust your inner voice in a way you never did before. You notice synchronicities. You feel connected to the rhythm of life, even when things aren't perfect. You stop needing to understand everything with your mind because your soul knows. And that knowing becomes your compass. Not the kind that leads to safety or predictability, but the kind that leads to truth. And truth, once you've tasted it, becomes non-negotiable. You can't go back to who you were. You can't unknow your power. You can't pretend to be asleep once you've awakened. But this rebirth isn't just about feeling better, it's about living differently. You start making choices from alignment, not fear. You speak from your heart, even when your voice shakes. You create from inspiration, not obligation. You no longer tolerate relationships that ask you to shrink. You say no when it dishonors you. You say yes when it scares you but feels right. You start designing your life around your soul, not around your wounds. And that's when the real magic begins. Not the kind of magic that floats above the world, untouched, but the kind that roots deeply into the soil of your humanity and turns everything into sacred ground. You realize that the darkness didn't break you, it broke you open. And in that opening, you found the space where God lives, where love lives, where the real you was hiding. And now you don't just believe in healing, you embody it. You don't just talk about awakening, you live it. Quietly, powerfully, authentically, because you've walked through your own fire and now you carry the flame. This is the gift of the dark feelings. They aren't mistakes, they're initiations. They are the soul's way of calling you back to yourself, not as punishment but as invitation. And when you finally stop running from them, when you turn around and face them with open eyes and an open heart, they transform. The sadness becomes compassion. The fear becomes intuition. The anger becomes boundaries. The emptiness becomes spaciousness. The confusion becomes clarity. The breakdown becomes breakthrough. And the darkness becomes the light you are always searching for. So now I ask you truly, deeply, sincerely, if everything you've been through, every tear, every loss, every sleepless night was all part of remembering who you really are, can you finally stop resisting your path and start honoring it? Can you bless it even when it's hard? Can you trust that your soul knows exactly what it's doing? Because if you can, you're not just awakening. You're rising, and the world has been waiting for you. Let this be that moment. Let this be your return. Let this be your rebirth.